Hello, everyone. This is the podcast Positive Psychology Gone Wrong. The reason I want to talk about this is that I am a psychologist myself, and I see very disturbing trends, global trends, that make me wonder. That make me wonder about the popularity of positive psychology, about this essence, and what it really does to people. And when I think about this, I come to the conclusion that if you are deceived using science, the lie doesn't become a science. And I want to develop this thesis in our podcast. I need to talk about this because this so-called teaching is spreading like a virus in people's minds. This is a disease of the mind, a mental HIV, if you please. But out of a great love for people, the founding father of positive psychology is the American scientist Martin Seligman, who also worked on learned helplessness. This phenomenon occurs in humans and animals when exposed to discomfort, pain, and suffering. After a long time of negative reinforcement, aka suffering, such beings tend to decide that they have no control over the situation and cannot change anything, even if objectively there is a way out. The last mass example of the formation of learned helplessness is in huge populations we observed during the so-called quarantine. Suddenly it became unscientific to prevent acute respiratory infections with the help of sun and air baths and walks. It suddenly became scientific to wear a rag on your face. If you are being deceived under the disguise of science, the lie doesn't become a science. It may surprise you, but Seligman developed another, more quote unquote humane and non obvious way of developing learned helplessness. It is called positive psychology. And for now, I want to ask you to remember this thesis. Let's say you're not a psychologist. You're just interested in different things and how your brain works and how to be happy. You're looking around in search of means and instruments. And now you're reading an advertising booklet, for example, about positive psychology. And for example, you go to the website of some positive psychologists. There you will find information that this is a strictly scientific thing, about happiness and fullness of life, about selfless work that Seligman did in the fight against the growing trends of depression. The positive psychology does not replace the classical one, which is focused on negativity, trauma, pathologies, and pain, which almost doesn't pay attention to the topics of happiness, strength, prosperity. It also lists all the bonuses that a positive approach brings, the most important of which is a shift towards the positive perspective. And yes, of course, they say, we are for balance, of course. We just complement the negative focus of psychology with our positive one. And they list studies on how a positive outlook on life makes a person happy and productive. And of course, don't get me wrong, just thinking positively can be as harmful as being pessimistic. And they go on and on, telling you everything in the spirit. However, pitching and presenting the essence of the theory are two significant differences. I came across a website, if I remember correctly, it's, let me see, positivepsychology.com. And I read and I wanted to realize what they want to sell to people. So eventually they got to the point, to the essence of their so-called psychology. And there is a significant fragment in their description where all illusions fall apart, for at least for a person with critical thinking. This is a part where they compare classical psychology with the positive one. They invite us to imagine a scale from -5 to +5. It is said that on this scale, at -5 are people with psychological problems, like mental health problems, and at the +5, there are those who prosper and live to the fullest. Isn't it great, right? And at point 0, we have those who do not have mental health problems, but those people do not thrive. Well, okay, let's go on. We are told that conventional psychology is focused on weakness and that psychologists are trained to focus on what is wrong with a person to reduce or eliminate symptoms. Good job. Psychologists are undoubtedly great, they say, but can only take a person from -5 to 0 on the scale. But how to help a person blossom and live a meaningful life? This is where positive people get down to business. They know how to be happy for you. And they move their clients from 0 to +5 on the scale. Isn't it wonderful? Students of the psychology department are taught such a subject as mathematical methods in psychology. Well, even if you were not taught this thing, just using logic and common sense, you see that the scale is a manipulation. If people with some psychological deviations live at -5 mark, then people with other deviations live at the mark of +5. Why? Well, let's think about it. Since positive emotions play a significant role in this whole thing, let's look at the theory of emotions, the scientific ones, which are mathematically verified. Let us open a textbook on psychophysiology, section Psychophysiology of Emotions, and you will see, for example, approaches to the mathematical analysis of emotions and geometric dimensions of emotional space. You will find the work of Woodward and Schlossberg on creating a 3D math model on emotional space, as well as Plutchik did. You may find a multivariate analysis by Osgood and Ekman. The 0 mark on the scale corresponds to calmness. In what way does a state of emotional calmness exclude prosperity and fullness of life? How come? How does that happen? And then there is the need information theory of emotions, according to which the emotions of higher animals and humans are determined by some actual need as an assessment of the probability of its satisfaction based on philo and ontogenetic experience. A lot of research has been done on this theory, and interestingly, researchers Davidson and Geller concluded that the sign of emotions, the +1 or the minus, depends on the ratio of the activity of the left frontal cortex and the right frontal cortex of the brain. It turns out that if your left frontal cortex is more active than the right one, you experience positive emotions. If it's vice versa, if the right frontal cortex is more active, then you experience negative emotions. But it's not all. The right frontal cortex, which is kind of responsible for our negative emotions, is predominantly associated with information previously acquired and stored in memory. And the left frontal cortex, that is related to our positive emotions, is associated with the current information available, which came in recently. It is possible to conclude that by accustoming oneself to be constantly on the plus pole, to be positive all the time, a person bypasses access to his experience and ceases to use it to the full in life. So, what will happen in the long term? If we believe the positive psychologist that you need to always live on the +5 mark, squeeze out your positive maximum. Well, let us see an example. There is one positive psychologist that I know. Uh, she teaches a lot of students in Kiev, where I come from. So when the war in Ukraine started and Russians invaded our country, she lamented on social media, "What is happening? We do not deserve this, do we?" She was lost and she was scared. I can understand being scared during the war, but really, don't you understand what's going on? Didn't you see it coming? This is learned helplessness, learned positive helplessness. And I have a lot of questions to ask this lady. Well, you're a psychologist. You have been advising people for some long years. Haven't you assessed the state of society you live in? Haven't you seen the trends? Or what have you been doing all this time? The fact is that the ability to see a trend, to predict, is ensured by the fact that the person can assess memory, experience, and see what is happening here and now under his nose. But the lady teacher of positive psychology has this ability shunted because of positive psychology. The lady has students whose reality is fragmented to disgrace too. Her disciples do the same with their clients, and the sickness of mind is rampant. So, while she is mentally still a child, other people use this knowledge for entirely different purposes. All of Ukraine knows this example very well. I'm talking about the 2-3 weeks guy and the one who saves from heart attacks and strokes. You know what I'm talking about, and you know who I'm talking about. I have already analyzed his manipulations several times. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of them. But those who are used to running away from reality, whom it scares, who desperately want to everything to be just fine, they do not notice manipulators like those. They cannot trace the dynamics of their speeches, the conclusions they make. You already know that the ability to assess experience is associated with negative emotions, in particular with the feeling of sadness. That's why they say that knowledge increases sorrow. So maybe it's not in vain that we simple and not positive psychologists bring a person to the zero mark on this, I don't know, imaginary scale, so that people are able to gain calmness and the ability to see the fullness of reality, see things as they are as much as possible without emotional overtones. The closer you get to the zero mark, the more productive reflections you make and the more balanced decisions. One aspires this state during meditation, when the illusion stops and you humbly touch the truth. Thank you guys, until next time.